Call the meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 30th, 2013 meeting of the Rhinebeck Village Board. This is a workshop to discuss the rezoning of the Fairgrounds and the Events Code, and then we will conduct other business afterwards. I guess to start, we'll have Neil Wilson, who has been working with the Fairgrounds Board and the Village Board to present this plan.
I'll show you.
Can we move? Can we turn this board just a little bit so we can see and move it towards the?
How do you want it?
I say no, then the people can.
Yeah, the speakers look on the
This one?
Yeah, I don't know if I got it.
Push it on
This way?
Yeah, I really bring it
Yeah,
down.
but now you have to turn it a little bit this way so we can see. Okay, good, thank you.
Good? Okay. All right. Good evening. My name is Neil Wilson, and I'm a planning consultant, LRC Planning Services out of Poughkeepsie. I was retained by the Fairgrounds to assist them in the work with the committee of the Village Board to develop a proposed zoning map, and I'll kind of walk you through this in just a second, as well as the actual written legislation that is the subject of tonight's public session, I should say. We had actually I'd taken everybody sort of through this map of the last presentation we had back in the middle of June, and there was a little bit of confusion in terms of some of the information on the table. When you look at the written legislation, it refers to a parent parcel. And the intention here was that the parent parcel literally appear as a title at the very top. The idea being that when we calculate out things like... Got to get it closer? Okay. When we calculate things like building coverage and impervious surface coverage and those sorts of things, that we were referring to the parent parcel. If you notice, for instance, there's the 4H parcel, which sits more or less in the middle of the section of the Fairgrounds that's in the village. It's a landlocked piece. And so as a landlocked piece, virtually anything that might otherwise happen here might be subject to an individual variance. But the idea here is that by virtue of adoption of the legislation, that we are creating a zoning map, and that this zone, this fairground zone, and we refer to this as an as-built. So in other words, the structures and the other features that are on the ground are identified. They are labeled as basically the approved site plan. So you establish a baseline of information about where things are in relationship to each other, as well as to off-site locations. So this functions not only as the zoning map, but the as-built site plan, if you will, and that would be upon adoption of the underlying legislation. With respect to the legislation itself, we did receive some comments at the June 12th session. We did make a few adjustments to the legislation. I just wanted to go through that very quickly. Page 2 under permitted principal uses, and the one that I'm referring to is actually at the very bottom, identified as review draft June 12, 2013. And the underline text that you see in the legislation is the new stuff that we added. We had some comments about noise, so what we added was some specific language, specifically identifying that entertainment events shall be designed to, and the new language is direct noise away from residences. We had comments about identifying temporary and seasonal day camps, which of course we have added that language. Actually, we've added in a couple of places in item number 5 and number 8 on page 2. And I think that those were, oh no, I'm sorry, on the very top of page 4, We had questions about signage, and so what we did was to add some language to try to identify that the signage that we were referring to had to do with the vendor signage within and sort of the interior of the site. During fairground activities, you're going to have certain vendors, they're advertising their location, they're advertising whatever it is that they happen to be selling, and that those would be permitted signs as well. And with those changes coming away from the June meeting, that's where we are at this particular point. So we're here to hear what everybody else has to say.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks, Neil. Okay, at this time, I would like it open to public comment. I do have the sign-in sheet here. I only have 3 people on this list, so if anybody else wants to speak, please raise your hand, and then I'll add your name to this list after we finish with these 3 people. Steve Rosenberg, you're up first.
Thank you very much. Steve Rosenberg, 25 Platt Avenue. Thank again everyone on the Village Board and with the Fairgrounds for taking such a thoughtful and considered approach to adopting new zoning for the Fairgrounds. I think it's really important for the community. I'm not sure if I have the most recent version of the document, so indulge me if I say anything that's already been changed or modified in some way. But I thought a handful of tweaks to the proposed ordinance could make a difference in ensuring in the future that the community and the fairgrounds are best served by the ordinance. The first is, as I understand the proposed law, it does not necessarily require any sort of public hearing in the event of a proposed construction or new development at the fairgrounds. And like, for example, the hospital right now, a special use permit for certain types of new construction or development would necessarily require a public hearing, and I think that would serve the community well. And I would suggest that the board consider a couple of circumstances when a special permit would be required. So it would give a little bit of a higher level of review and make sure that the public was part of the process. And so those might be if there was a proposed new building or multiple buildings were proposed together that were greater than a certain size. I don't know exactly what that size might be 10,000 square feet, 5,000 square feet, something above which it's not just sort of a de minimis improvement that isn't going to impact the neighbors or the community. A second criterion might be the cost. If it was anticipated that the new construction would cost above a certain amount, maybe $100,000, $150,000, then that too would not be a de minimis new development or construction, but it would be something of a certain scale. And the third criterion might be if it was located within a certain distance from the buffer area. So that's one suggestion. The second is really, when I read the ordinance and then I read it again, and there's a statement on the very first page about the purpose, and it says in 1A that in establishing the Fairgrounds District, the village finds that the activities, uses, and improvements would do all these positive things, serve and promote the community, result in development compatible with the village development patterns, not result in impacts. I think what is meant to be said is that the village finds that these activities, uses, and improvements need to be reasonably managed in accordance with this ordinance to ensure that they will contribute to the village, not have an impact, etc. So it's sort of a technical fix, but I think it's an important one. 2 more things. I understand from the presentation a moment ago that there was some additional language added regarding noise, which is terrific. As a general matter, I think it would be great if there was some additional guidance to the planning board that included a little bit more specific language that there should be an assumption that new construction and development and activities would be oriented preferably to the north of the existing sort of built area of the fairgrounds, away from residential neighborhoods, and that the potential impacts of new development from traffic, lighting, and noise likewise would be directed away. And finally, with respect to the design of new structures at the fairgrounds, the proposed draft, I think, talks about the design being consistent with the existing design of structures at the fairgrounds. I think what was intended was for the design to be consistent with the sort of character and rural character and community character of the village, because in fact the design of the structures at the fairgrounds are quite varied and diverse. I don't know that anybody could sort of pick out a design at the fairgrounds as sort of a standard to guide future decision making. So those are my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. John Verricchio.
My name is John Verricchio. I'm a village resident. I just wanted to get something clear in my mind from the site plan. It would seem to me that if you're using this as a site plan and saying that the parent parcel encompasses all of the lots, tracts, et cetera, this includes, I guess, the land that's in the town also. I don't see the town-village line, and it wouldn't be, if I'm right, the land that Central Hudson owns, the right-of-way and the power line, is in the town, mostly in the town.
We have jurisdiction.
Right, so I think that should be made clear on the site plan, and that none of this, not any part of this ordinance would apply to lands that are in the town.
Correct.
And maybe some sort of cooperation between the town and the village and the agricultural society to tie up all loose ends for what is deemed to be proper, and not to have any problems in the future when the fair tries to do some activities, and then it's deemed that they're not in compliance. So that's all I would comment on right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. John Worth, did you want to comment now on zoning?
No, I just had my name on there in the event that something came up about the events code. that we
Okay.
have to
Yeah, we're doing zoning now, then we'll move to events code when we finish this. Anybody else from the public that would like to comment regarding the zoning issue? Mr. Cantor.
Good evening. My name is Richard Cantor. I am an attorney working with the Fairgrounds on both the zoning and events code. I'd like to address the public hearing issue that Mr. Rosenberg raised. The New York State Village Law differentiates between the procedure for site plans and the procedure for special use permit. In the New York State Village Law, public hearings for site plans are a matter of local legislation. The village zoning law can provide for them or cannot provide for them as the village chooses, as opposed to special use permits, which by state law have a mandated public hearing. In this case, the village of Rhinebeck, in its zoning code, for all site plans, not just the fairgrounds, has a provision in which the planning board may hold a public hearing in any site plan application. So it's a discretionary call with the planning board. It's the fairgrounds' point of view that there's no reason to differentiate on the procedural issue of public hearing for this site plan versus any other site plan, and that the existing provision in the village law that gives the planning board discretion to hold a public hearing on a site plan application is sufficient to cover the issue. I think Mr. Rosenberg, I wasn't fully sure, was also suggesting that on certain larger I'll say larger, more expensive, bigger site plan applications that will also be deemed a special permit use. The point of view of the fairgrounds is that there is no reason to make this a special permit use. This entire district, if you create this district, is the fairgrounds. The map does clearly delineate the town and village line, and as you said, Mr. Reardon, we're discussing zoning for the village. This has no applicability to the town. The town property is shown on the map just so that everybody sees the full extent of the fairground property. In terms of the introductory language in which the draft says that the village finds that the fairground activities would, and then it lists characteristics submitted that is appropriate. The fairgrounds have been there for decades, and it's reasonable at this point for the village to conclude that the activities in question would serve and promote the public convenience, are compatible with the patterns of development in the village. It's a central part of the pattern of development in the village. So from the point of view of the fairgrounds, we would suggest that the public hearing provision is adequately covered. There is no reason to make this a special use permit, and that the format of the introductory language, at least in the opinion of the fairgrounds, is appropriate. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Anybody else? No more comments from the public? Comments from the board? Heath?
No.
Brent?
As far as the word wood in 1A, I think we were having a discussion about whether we would have shell or wood in there. Shell would be that that's the goal of any improvements that are to be in the Fairgrounds district. And that's kind of the spirit of this, is that improvements in the Fairgrounds district would serve these four purposes. So could we put the word shall in there instead of would? I mean, do you think that would?
We can make any changes that we agree upon, if that's going to make a significant difference.
I mean, I think that's what we intended, wasn't it?
Yes? I don't see a big difference between shall and would.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, sir.
Perhaps the difference between would and shall maybe is only semantic and doesn't have any substantive difference, but I think that it's possible to read a substantive difference into it, and using the word would is a finding that the existing facts support these determinations, as opposed to shall, which has some element that prospectively the fairgrounds may meet these goals. I think, again, if this were something new that you didn't know about and wasn't here for decades and decades and decades, then I would better understand Mr. Rosenberg's point. And again, I don't mean to make a big deal of the difference between would and shall. It may be purely semantic and may not make it a difference, but if we had our druthers, we'd prefer the word would. But if you feel more comfortable with the word shall, so be it.
Steve?
Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. I think maybe we should both stand up here. And I think the whole purpose of this is prospective. It's not looking back or at what is. The purpose of the zoning ordinance is to govern and manage in collaboration with the fairgrounds in a fair and reasonable way future new developments and construction activity. For it to state at the outset, before you have any idea what the future construction and development activities would be, that they are compatible with the village and meet all these requirements and don't have an impact on property values and whatnot, seems to me to be illogical. And the stated purpose should be very clear that in the future, the reason you're adopting this ordinance is to ensure that those future changes, construction activities, development, will in fact achieve those purposes.
Brent, you got anything else?
The other point in permitted principal uses in C4, the latest draft says concerts, theatrical and religious events, dance and variety shows, and other similar forms of live entertainment in conjunction with permitted activities and events in the district. Such entertainment events shall be designed, and then we inserted, to direct noise away from residences and to limit noise and other impacts on surrounding residential districts. And to me, I thought that language was sufficient to protect the sensitivity of the residential area nearby. I don't know if the folks out there have that latest insertion.
There's one version available to the public so far. When we make the significant changes to this document,
Okay.
then we're going to release another
Neil
version to the
pointed
public.
out that in his discussion at the beginning.
Yeah. You have anything else, Brent?
Oh, there was some housekeeping suggestions from Bob Fennell, like there's a reference to a town assessor or the village assessor, and it should read.
Can you point to the?
I don't know if I want to go through all of this. It's just basically.
Are these technical comments?
Yeah, like really innocuous things. I don't know. Okay, I'll give this to you then.
Anything else, Brent?
Let's see. That's all I have, I think.
Howie?
I just want to make everybody aware here that way back in November 2011, at our first events code public hearing, the Village Ethics Board deemed that I have to recuse myself of any events with the fairgrounds because my company that I work for, Dutchess Beer, is a sponsor of the fairgrounds. So anything I say is basically as a village resident. But I just had a question on a parent parcel. Is it just one parcel? The 4-H area, or is
No, the 4-H parcel would be part of the overall parent parcel. Because we have, the idea of a parent parcel is a construct for purposes of this piece of legislation. We have several different pieces of property out here along Platt Avenue. The larger fairgrounds piece within the village, the 4-H piece. And when you look at the area and the bulk requirements that we were discussing in terms of setbacks from boundary lines and maximum impervious surface, when you start to apply those things to, and I'm using the 4-H pieces, as an example, when you start to apply them immediately, all of these structures on the ground as they sit today become non-conforming, which really doesn't make a lot of sense in the context of what we're trying to achieve here. So what the idea of the parent parcel is, we recognize that there are individual parcels here, but for purposes of zoning alone and zoning compliance, we're treating them as if they were all merged, so that we don't trip over ourselves for maximum impervious surface, which here is probably around maybe 70%, but for the total is something probably around maybe 16, 17%. And so again, it's a construct. That was the idea.
okay? That's it.
Yeah. I think, I've said this before, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands how we got where we are today. When the zoning law was written, the fairgrounds was in a residential zone, and it was ruled a non-conforming use in a residential zone. And when you're a non-conforming use in a residential zone, basically you are handcuffed as far as how you can operate. You can't not expand. And when I say expand, you can't build, you can't add events, you can't do anything other than what you were doing when that zoning law was written. Over the years, fairgrounds grew and expanded. It actually was against the law. The law was not enforced. Was it a bad thing? No. The fairgrounds is a beautiful piece of property. It's very well maintained. It's an asset to this community. However, and Andy can speak to this very well because he's been there for 20 years, the fairgrounds cannot operate and look the way it does on 6 days of county fair per year. So the expansion of this fairgrounds has been a necessary component to their success, and it has been an instrumental part in the success to this village. And, you know, there are people that say, well, you know, the fair is 6 days a year, and all of those people come in, and they go to the fair, and they leave, and they don't spend any money in the village. But there's so many people that come to that fairgrounds, and they see what this community looks like, and they come back. It does generate sales tax revenue. The village gets money from that. It's unrealistic to handcuff the operation of the fairgrounds with an outdated zoning law. So in the last 3 years, due to a problem that we had as far as a zoning issue, it became quite obvious that we needed to address the fairgrounds and their zoning designation. So what you see here in front of you tonight is the process over the last 2 years. Representatives from the fairgrounds, Dick Weckeser, Louis Ruge, Andy, Bucky Kuhn, myself, Brandt, Bob Fennell, John Clark, people from planning, zoning, village board, fairgrounds operations have come together to try and come up with a document that is going to allow the fairgrounds to be successful. We are not trying to restrict their activity. We want them to be able to operate as a fairgrounds, which they can't currently do under what their zoning designation is. So that's our effort here. With that said, we also need to be careful of the impacts that the fairgrounds has on the community. And the fairgrounds has been great over the last 2 years, working with me to address some of the issues we had. And when I say issues, traffic on residential streets, heavy truck traffic. We have weight restrictions on those streets, and it was never enforced. And it became a concern for the people who live in the neighborhoods. And quite frankly, I don't blame them. Who needs heavy tractor trailers running up and down a street where there's young children? It's not something we need. There are alternatives that can be done to provide for different access to the fairgrounds, and they've worked with us to do that. We've reconfigured the traffic plan. The main gate, eventually, it's being used now. The main gate is now up at the north side of the fairgrounds. Eventually, it's in the plan to completely rebuild that and make that the main entrance gate. That all takes time and money. As we all know, over the last couple of years, especially the year of Hurricane Irene, the fairgrounds had a really tough time. So money's not readily available. What we're trying to accomplish here is make the fairgrounds successful, make the community successful, work together, solve the problems, okay? Everybody here has a different opinion, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. But what this village board is charged with is looking at every single aspect of it. And the comment was made before. Mr. Cantor said, the fairgrounds has been there for decades. True, it's been there for 100 years. All right, we all moved here after that. Okay, so does that mean the fairgrounds has to be restricted to the point where they can't be successful? No, we have to find a way to make it work, and that's what we're here to do. So that's all I really have to say. Unless anybody else from the public would like to comment at this time, we'll move on from the fairground zoning into the events code part.
Can I?
Sure. Oh, I'm sorry. You're supposed to be over here. Go ahead, Heinz.
Well, in case we go to a special permitting process, one would have to, and not burying the fairgrounds down with small requests and so on. I'm sorry? And not bear the fairgrounds down with any kind of small requests and so on. Well, how would we go about to figure out what the limits would be? As Mr. Rosenberg has said here, is it $100,000, $150,000 in value? Is it $5,000 or $10,000, 10,000 square feet? How far should it be away from the fence? And I guess the question I have, how would we go about setting some kind of guidelines for the planning board?
The answer to that question is it's up to the 5 people sitting at the table to come up with something that they think is appropriate based on input from the public.
Yeah, I haven't heard any input from the public in that.
Well, I don't think anybody has a clear idea of what the square footage should be or what a dollar value should be. They're asking us to consider perhaps putting something like that in place. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be a special use permit. We could write something into the zoning law that says that any construction over X amount of square feet would require a public hearing. The idea here was to make this a permitted use. So you're actually contradicting yourself when you're saying now you're going to put a special use requirement in. Any other questions?
I mean, one of the planning board members said that the planning board is not shy about using that discretionary public hearing. So they frequently say, okay, for this project, we are going to have a public hearing.
But they also wanted some guidance.
And the
Well-
planning board also said that they don't feel they need to be involved in everything. If the Fairgrounds wants to build a maple syrup sugar shack, does that require a public hearing if it's a little 20 by 15 building? So, again, it's up to us to kind of get an idea of, if we want to do this, what we think the size requirement would be.
Well, what do you think, Jim?
At this point, I haven't made up my mind, and that's why this is a public comment. That's why I've asked all the members of the planning board to come. They're not all here, but I've asked them to come and share their thoughts with us. These are the people that are charged with working with this law all the time. They face it, all right? And they come to us with, a lot of times, because there's very vague language in the planning law or the zoning law. So it's important that they put their perspective into this. And what I would say, they need to give us guidance, because they're the ones that are dealing with these issues all the time. We don't. David?
David Miller from the Village Planning Board. I think the important thing is that it's a permitted use, because that gives us the possibility of having a public hearing should we decide if it's a significant improvement. If it's, as Jim said, if it's a shed or a small thing, if it's a large project. I guess we'll have to work out the guidelines. We can talk about this at our planning board meeting and try to make some suggestions back to the village board of square footage, of price, of distance. I like what Steve said, to try to make it as far as we can north of the residential district to make any new construction. But the may gives us the possibility, and many times we'll talk about a project and say, you know, this is a little large for what this person wants to do. Maybe we should have a public hearing, get some public input on this before we proceed. So the may is very important to us, and I think we could talk about some guidelines at our next planning board meeting and get something back to the village board. But I think the special permit for everything is a lot of public hearings that we don't need to have. I mean, I think we feel that. We have a lot of things in the code that says special permit. We have a public hearing, nobody shows, open the public hearing, close the public hearing. We have to advertise for 10 days or 2 weeks.
We know what that's like.
And, you know, it's a lot, it's a lot of trouble, and we don't need to do that all the time. So being a permitted use is a good thing, and we still have the discretion to hold a public hearing if we think it's a significant project. So I think we could talk at our next planning board meeting and get back to the village board.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mike?
Hi, Mike Gee, I'm on the planning board. Just to go to what Brant said in word usage, the word shall is intended to be mandatory, 120-62, so.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody else? Okay, thank you for your comments on the zoning. Our intent is to, based on comments we received prior, comments we received tonight, is to try and finalize a document and send this to public hearing. What that timetable is, we don't know yet, but based on the comments we received, we're going to meet again. We'll make make a joint effort to decide what this final document that we're going to send to public hearing is going to be, and as soon as we have a date set in stone for that, there will be a public announcement and there will be a public hearing, and people will have the opportunity to comment again. And just because we're having a public hearing does not mean that that law gets passed that evening. There's a process that gets followed. Okay? All right, we'll move on to the events code. John, you were the only one that had said you wanted to speak. Is there anybody from the public here who would like to comment about the events code prior to John coming up?
I was only in response to any questions anybody had, because last time at the first public workshop, I pretty pretty much outlined our work, what the document contained, set of our recommendations. So unless anybody has any further questions or whatever, that's why I'm here.
Anybody? Board, anything on the events code? Keith?
Nope.
Brant?
Well, I mean, I think there's a discussion about whether we should leave the public purpose language in broad police power language, you know, the safety, health, welfare, and well-being of persons or property kind of thing for the purpose clause. Or should we try to set guidelines to say, like, if the event, mentioning events' impact on noise and, you know, like hazardous materials and dust and things like that, I'm comfortable kind of leaving it the way it is in more broad language, that the purpose of the ordinance is preserve the public peace and maintain good order within the village, thereby ensuring the safety, health, welfare, and well-being of persons or property by regulating blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I think there was a question about whether we're supposed to kind of outline what, you know, the facets of the, you know, public health, safety, and welfare that we're regulating. And I think if we get into that, we're going to start enumerating the things that, not enumerating, but listing the things that we are regulating about. And it would tend to suggest that if we left something out, then we don't have purview over that particular thing, whether it's grind, you know, whether it's air quality or something like that. So I don't know what you guys think, but I'm comfortable with the purpose language the way it is.
Howie, any comments?
I just looking at my notes from the previous meeting, Mr. Worth. I had a question on non-routine, and I'm trying to find it in here, and it's this many pages. Non-routine events, did we kind of nail that down?
Non-routine activities?
Yeah, was that what it said, non-routine activities?
The question came up, I think, about, because it says routine, and the question was, what is routine? And I think at that time, routine was explained as being something you do on an everyday basis. You wake up in the morning, you get out of bed, you eat breakfast, you brush your teeth, you get dressed, you go to work. Those are routine activities. Anything outside of that, that isn't a normal everyday occurrence, is non-routine. Am I correct, John? Isn't that how we basically had described it? So a non-routine event would pretty much be any event that happens that you don't do every day of your life. So if somebody's bringing an event into the town, that's non-routine. So it falls under the
So it's
auspices of the, falls under the auspices of
Like a
the
book signing
events
and
code.
an art exhibition?
Well, yeah, and I think that many times in a zoning context, it's something that's not something that's commonly done in that particular district.
I think
Like-
what we need to keep in mind here too is, and again, I think I'll go back and I'll kind of explain how we got to this point, is there were 3 different things that happened back in 2009 and 2010 that triggered this. And the biggest one in my mind was the Clinton wedding, and 2 weeks prior, not knowing anything about what was going to happen in the village of Rhinebeck. So I got, quite frankly, I got pissed off, and I started calling the Secret Service, and I finally started getting some answers. But, you know, 2 weeks prior, we had absolutely no information about what was going to happen. And based on the fact that I rattled the chain, we got the information we needed, and we could make contingency plans. All right? One of the other things that happened, Northern Dutchess Hospital had their annual event, which is a great event, and I fully support, the Taste of Rhinebeck. But one of the vendors put a pig roaster on a village sidewalk. Inappropriate. It doesn't belong there. It's a safety issue. If somebody were to be injured, the taxpayers in this community are going to have to pay, an insurance company is going to have to settle it, and the taxpayers are the ones that ultimately pay for this type of thing. Nobody came and talked to us. Nobody asked us anything about putting something on the sidewalk. We have a law that says that they can't do this, but it was an event that an organization held with no communication with us. So if an organization wants to hold an event, we should have an idea of the scale of the event, the impacts of the event, what's going to happen, so we can prepare. Third thing was the fairgrounds had fireworks 3 nights in a row, and there was some outcry from the residential community because there was fairgrounds 3 nights in a row. You know, they were late because it was in the summertime, it was July 4th, you know, don't start until 10 o'clock at night, children couldn't sleep, you know, dogs were barking, whatever, okay? The point being is that we had no knowledge of this. The letter we got said there was going to be fireworks July 4th. It turned into 3 nights, and we had no knowledge of it. So the whole idea here is not to stop people from having events. If you want to have an event, just let us know what you're doing. So that if we have to have police coverage, if we have to make emergency plans because fire trucks need to get around, like the Clinton wedding when we had a mass of people down here on the Four Corners, we had to prepare in case we had to get emergency vehicles through. Those are the types of things. The fairgrounds is well equipped. They have standard operating guidelines and safety plans and emergency management plans, and we work with them. I work with them, Pete Dunn does, Henry Campbell does, and we interface with them all the time, and we plan for these large-scale events that they have. They know how to run an event. They're equipped to do it. They have parking. They have sanitary facilities. Board of Health comes in and inspects food things, but anything, other event that comes into town, we need to know about so we can make sure those people are doing as good a job as the fairgrounds is. That's the intent of the events code. It's not to stop anything, it's to make sure it's done right, to make sure there's no exposure on the village's part, and that somebody comes in here and sues the hell out of you and sues the taxpayers of this community, which they're doing, because how could you let this happen? Mr. Cannon.
I guess the first comment is that the draft of the events code, as it now exists, and I understand it's just a draft, does more than tell somebody, tell us what you're doing. It also has a provision for giving or denying permission to do the event. So that's one comment, that the events code goes further, Mr. Mayor, than merely tell us what you're doing.
Of course.
The second is I am quite confused when I listen to the comment about whether the intent of this draft is or is not to include the fairgrounds within the events code. In my terminology, the annual events that happen over and over are regularly occurring activities. Of course, they don't happen every day, but they happen every year. So I'm quite confused, and I think this draft, before you get to the point where you're formally introducing it and having a formal public hearing, needs to clarify this issue.
The intent of this is that anybody that's having an event, it doesn't matter who it is, everybody plays on the same playing field. They let us know what they're having. We know the fairgrounds has the car shows every year. We know they have the Sheep and Wool Festival. We know they have the fair. We're not worried about those events. But if they had a new event, we want to know what it is, and we want to know what the impacts are on this community. Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club wants to come in and have a rally at the fairgrounds. Okay. Do we really want that in our community? We want to know.
Then I get back to, if it's your intention to include the fairgrounds as a covered event in the terminology of the code, then I get back to the point where this draft is doing far more than saying, tell us what you're doing. It has approval or denial authority
Correct.
in the code, and if that's what you're going to present, then I say this in a cooperative, not a adversarial manner, then we're going to get into detailed questions because, in my opinion, for example, the fair itself is preempted. You have no authority to do that. Some of the other larger events are preempted. But if you merely have a code that says, tell us what you're doing, and you acknowledge that they are telling you what they're doing anyway.
Acknowledge it, who isn't?
If the code were merely to say to everyone, including the fairgrounds, tell us what you're doing, and you acknowledge they are anyway telling you what they're doing, then the level of concern about the code is not a great level of concern. If you're adopting a code that on its face gives you the power to say, we deny you permission to hold the fair, then we have a significant issue between the fairgrounds and the village.
It would be difficult after we have a zoning district that has fairground, that particular fairgrounds use a permitted use for us to say that you can't have an event that's permitted use.
They're two very different
No,
things.
they're not.
One
No,
is
they're
land
read
use.
together. They're read harmoniously.
Two very different legal provisions. One is land use, and the other is public health and safety in the firemen's and policemen's and sanitation sense.
Well,
something could be permitted under zoning and still have events code problems.
An event code regulates things that happen largely outside. When you have a building code, you have the fire department restrictions of how many people sit there. You have the zoning requirements as adequate parking and things like that. You can't do that for stuff that largely happens outdoors. So that's what the events code is for.
The intent of the fairgrounds, as I think has been manifested by its actions vis-a-vis the village over several years, has been to cooperate with the village, and that will remain its intention. But if, again, you're going to present for consideration for adoption a code that says we, not you individuals, but whoever is on the board from time to time, has the power to say no to the fairgrounds as one example, or to the Wool Festival as another example, then there are going to be significant legal issues.
I think you're totally...
If we said no, or if we just pass the ordinance?
If you pass an ordinance that says that the village has the power...
That's ridiculous.
Okay. Let me say something. I think you're totally ignoring the fact, the comment that I made before, is that the fairgrounds is the least of my worries, and I believe it's the least of the village board's worries. Let me finish.
Sorry.
Okay? The fairgrounds is set up to do large-scale events. We have no intention of telling them they can't have the Dutchess County Fair. That would be a disaster for this community. Okay? The events code, and I think you're reading too much into this, the events code is not designed to stop the fairgrounds. Everybody in this community has to play on an equal playing field. So if you're going to stage an event, and we've talked with the fairgrounds folks about this, if you're going to stage an event, you need to talk to us and let it know what it is. And if it's not appropriate and this thing cannot be staged properly, we should have the right to deny it so it doesn't negatively impact the residents of this community. Is that going to happen with the fairgrounds? No.
I have no doubt that Jim Reardon would not say no to any reasonable activity of the fairgrounds. But I don't know what Jim Reardon's successor in 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years is going to say. And this code, if you adopt it, isn't just what Howard or Brandt or Heath or Hines or Jim is going to say. It's what whoever sits in these seats over the years is going to say. And so it has nothing to do.
Do you have the same concern about the zoning law? Who sits in these seats after the zoning law is in place?
No, the zoning law is adopted. If it's amended in the future, that's something else.
It requires site plan review, so are you going to have a concern about who sits on the planning board? I mean, they can come up with all sorts of aesthetic requirements for you, hoops for you to jump through.
There is...
If you have additional improvements you're proposing.
There's 75...
I mean, if you have a fundamental mistrust in local government, then there's nothing we can do for you.
Okay. I don't know who you're talking to, because I didn't say anything about a fundamental mistrust in local government.
Let's keep this cool.
The language, what he's saying is the language gives, in the events code, gives the absolute decision to the board to say, no, you're not going to have the Dutchess County Fair this year. No, you're not going to have.
I understand what he's saying.
The principles of the events code.
Mr. Newman,
So I suggest you don't.
There's 75 years of legal history about the powers of planning boards to grant or to deny site plan approval. And so, no, that's not the concern. But here you have a code which doesn't have that kind of legal history and has the potential in the future, in the hands of others, to cause havoc. And I'm asking you, given the fact that you acknowledge the cooperative nature of the fairgrounds and the fact that they already, in terms of information, tell you everything you need to know, that you treat this in this code as an exempt activity because it's regularly occurring, and if in the future you find that the fairgrounds is acting in a way that you don't consider appropriate, you always have the authority to come back to consider and amending your events code.
Well, what I would counter that with is you say, Jim Reardon, Brant Nunicker, Heath, Howie, Hines, we're not always going to be here, okay? So what you're saying is a cooperative relationship now. where is this village and where is this community 20 years down the road when none of us are here, and it's no longer a cooperative relationship?
The answer to the question is there will be a village board of trustees that has whatever legal powers it has to amend the code to do whatever it thinks it requires to protect the public interest.
And we don't have that right now.
Of course you have the power to protect the public interest.
No, we don't.
You don't have a reason to adopt a code that grants the power to deny the events at the fairgrounds.
Okay, thank you for sharing your opinion with us.
My name is Steve Sansola. I live on 45 Lorraine Drive. Just listening to the conversation here, I would just counter by saying that the argument is stated that how can the fairgrounds continue to trust change in leadership on the village board? And I would just counter by saying the same is true for the leadership of the fairgrounds. So there has to be mutual respect and cooperation. But I guess I would make the statement, a strong statement, that we elect our officials to represent the best of the community going forward. And so I think there is an important need to have the ability to have authority within the village to provide for the public good. And that does require you to have the responsibility to agree or not to agree a particular function. And you gave the example of a Hell's Angel rally, for example, where this year the fairground invited the new, I think the living
Country Living?
Yeah, which was a nice event, but what if it wasn't? You know, so I guess I'm advocating for the fact that the village board, as elected representatives, should have the ability to manage that in a cooperative and reasonable and appropriate way.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else?
Can I go back to the my thing here I was talking about? It says the word event shall mean a non-routine activity within the village that brings together an assemblage or a gathering of a group of people. So my question is a book signing that has 10, 15 people, are they going to have to fill out an event code form?
John, you want to address that?
I think I'd like to address a couple of comments. John Worth, I was the chairman of the steering committee that put together the report and the proposed draft for the events code, for those of you who don't know. Just to go back to what I said at the first meeting, our objective was, or our challenge was, to create a balance where you could have regulation of an event while at the same time not having an adverse impact on the community. And that was how we approached this particular challenge. Also, our focus, and we didn't put a specific number in our draft, our focus wasn't on numbers. Our focus was on the ability of the municipality to respond to the challenges of an event, because that is their inherent duty to protect the public welfare. In hindsight, because at the last public workshop there was some question about the use of definitions and what the definitions meant and whatever, in hindsight, I would delete our reference to a mass gathering and also any reference to a special event. And why do I say that? Because an event is an event. And if our focus is on how do you respond and manage an event from the municipality's point of view, the number really isn't important. It could be anything which is a small event which could have an impact on the community, and that needs to be, somehow managed and regulated. For example, a mass gathering for Dutchess County is 5,000. A mass gathering for the state is 5,000. I mean, that's well beyond what most usual events bring about in the village. And really, an event outside of anything that's routine, I guess you would call a special event, but you don't need to use the word special, because I think now we're starting to confuse the public about, why we're using this different terminology, because it really doesn't apply to the draft as we proposed it. On the question of a permit, the municipality has an absolute right to deny a permit. A permit is an application to do something, and that's the whole inherent nature of an events code, to bring together or bring information to the municipality in the form of an application as to what's going to take place, when it's going to take place, where it's going to take place, so that you can measure the ability of the municipality to respond to an emergency and to protect the public. So you have an absolute right to say no to an application. That's not anything that, that's not a discretionary thing. You have an absolute right to say no to an application if it doesn't fulfill the requirements and standards that you feel are necessary in order to protect the public. When we approached this, because we felt the last draft of the ordinance was somehow, or at least it appeared to focus too much on the fairgrounds, our objective was to eliminate the fairgrounds as why we're having an events code. That's not why we're having an events code. It pertains to any event, including events that take place on the fairgrounds. And we gave the example in our report of what one community did when they exempted the fairgrounds from its events code, and that's Orange County, the Orange County Fairgrounds. It exempted it, and that's a choice that you have, whether to deal with it, or exempt it entirely. And I think there may be, and again, I somewhat disagree with what, I forget your last name.
Cantor.
What's this?
Mr. Cantor.
Cantor talked about the permitted use. The zoning ordinance that's being proposed, as I view it, provides all kinds of permitted uses at the fairgrounds. But because you allow all these kinds of uses to take place, doesn't mean that you can't regulate an event that takes place at the fairgrounds. And why do I say that? Because what you're regulating is not only what takes place at the fairgrounds, but what takes place outside the fairgrounds. In other words, what are some of the considerations that you take into account when you decide whether to provide, allow a permit or not allow a permit? It's traffic approaching. It's what happens outside the fairgrounds. So it's more, it embraces more than just what happens at the fairgrounds. So my position is, and I think I'm correct on this, is that you do have the right to regulate what goes on there. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have the inherent ability that a municipality has to deal with protecting, the public welfare. So,
Do we
Yeah.
have the right to regulate that if we don't have an events code at all? Do we have a right to regulate that today?
I think it's more difficult because, what standard do you use? How do you know what someone is going to, what someone is providing for, what kind of an event it is, what's the size of the event, where's it going to take place or whatever?
Again, I think we go back to that vague general language that's in the village code that does health, safety, and welfare of the community, but there's no description.
I know.
I mean,
And like I
there's-
said before,
yeah.
with the zoning law, everybody has an opinion on this, on what's good and what's not. This village board's responsibility is to protect this community. And that's the action that we are considering here, and that's the decision we need to make.
We, for example, and we put it in the report, didn't talk about anything about noise because you already have a noise ordinance. And all the ordinances that we looked at, none of them put everything into one ordinance. In other words, you don't have a special events or an events code, and then you put in noises and all other kinds of regulations. They're separate ordinances for that because, noise is a hard thing to regulate. And I saw something in the zoning ordinance about, trying to direct noise, and I don't know how you do that. I mean, noise is noise, and it's just going to go where it's going to go. Maybe buffers and things like that help, but noise is noise. I mean, it's the volume of noise or the decibel amount of noise that you can regulate if you, get equipment and all the rest of those things. But, there's, even in noise ordinances, there's standard things that they talk about. They describe certain noise as vehicle noise. I mean, because there's a certain amount of tolerance for noises that people have in daily situations, like noises from fire trucks, noises from church bells, noises from cars and whatever. So we didn't put anything in there as part of the events code because we felt that was separate. You already have a noise ordinance. If it needs to be, further regulated or be more specific, that's for the municipality to decide, so.
Okay, thanks, John.
Yep.
Anybody else on the events code? David?
Mr. Cantor is concerned about what would happen down the line when this board changes. I would also be concerned about what happens down the line when the Fairgrounds board changes. These two boards have a good working relationship. Do I believe that the current Fairgrounds board would say yes if someone said, I want a Woodstock Music Festival with 3 days of 20 hours a day of rock music at the fair, that they would say, no, we don't want that. But again, down the line, would the Fairgrounds board say, we're in a lot of trouble this year, we need some revenue, and we're going to say yes to this event? So I don't think that this is going to come up, whether it's in the fair or outside of the fair, but I think we do need something where the board has a right to protect the public and say no, that this is an event that would not be good for the community. And, so I think we do need this.
Thanks, David. Anybody else? Okay, I'll thank you all for...
Question.
Go ahead.
Maybe it'd be aimed at John, I don't know, but did we work with the town at all when this was going through? And the reason I asked that question is the 3 points that the mayor brought up. Number 1 being the Clinton wedding, and the fact that the wedding occurred in the town and not in the village, and all of the influx of people was collateral to the event. So that event wouldn't fall under this code, as I understand it. The second one, the pig roast, that no question there. But on the fireworks, we're talking about a property, the fairgrounds, being divided in the village and the town, and what's to keep. The fairgrounds could go over on the soccer field and set off 7 days worth of fireworks. It's not going to, the village events code, it's not going to apply to it at all.
Correct. It's a village events code. Town has an events code. They had it since
Right,
1971.
Okay, so the Clinton wedding being outside of the town, that being cited as a, as a reference point for this, they would never have had to apply for a permit because it didn't happen
If
in
they
the
were
village.
going to stage something in the village, yes. It
Right.
happened the
Okay.
wedding itself was in the town.
Right,
Out of our jurisdiction.
okay,
What happened at Astor Courts, we have no oversight on.
right.
But something that were to happen in the village, we would. And I'll just use a case in point. The half marathon came in after the Clinton wedding. But they called me on the phone. They said, we're interested in bringing this event to your community. What do we need to do? And I, quite frankly, told them, we don't have an events code. We just want your cooperation in the planning. And these people are professional. They do events in communities all over the country. And they're used to going through these procedures and dealing with events codes and dealing with municipalities and dealing with emergency plans. So that's the type of thing that we need. What we don't need is for somebody just to hold an event with us having no knowledge and not being prepared for what happens.
Jim, just to answer that question about did we work with the town, we didn't work with the town because our mission was to create something for the village. The town has its own events code already, which is a very restrictive events code. So there was no reason to work with the town. This was specifically for the village.
Anybody else? Okay, I thank you all for coming. I thank you for your comments. If you would like to stay for the rest of our meeting, you're welcome to.
That's it.
Take 5?
Yeah, take 5.
Oh, yeah, we're not done.
Take 5.
Okay, we ready? Okay, other business. Heath, I had received this letter. It was dated July 11th, and it's from the federal, it's from a company. They're looking for business, of course, but apparently the FCC had instituted new regulations as far as bandwidths for organizations, and our fire department is affected by this. I thought it was already all taken care of.
Okay.
So you may want to talk with Wayne and talk with Kevin and I'll hand this over to you and find out what the status is on it. I thought Wayne had addressed that, but I could be wrong. The company that had approached us and we had approved conditionally for the filming here in Rhinebeck had sent Lisa some more information today, and they had requested, originally they wanted 12 parking spots in the parking lot, and all of a sudden it morphed into 24 spots. So 15 of those were for personal cars, and the conversation I had with Lisa was to inform them that the personal cars need to be parked on the street, that we could not give up all of the room that they were asking for in the municipal lot. And their hours of operation originally were going to be from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Now they're talking from 1 p.m. till 1 a.m. on Wednesday, August 7th, which is next week. And they are asking for a police officer, just in case there's any issues in their filming locations. They have agreed to compensate us for the police coverage. I did have Lisa make them aware that there's potential for an overtime situation here, and they're in agreement to that. So, given those changes, I guess what I'm going to ask is for the board I'll make a motion to approve the changes.
Second?
Second. Any discussion?
Do we have a fee schedule in place for that type of situation when someone wants to use our police officers?
Well, for the police officers?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, there's a fee that we charge them, yes.
Okay.
I thought you meant a use fee for like the parking lot or something like that. No, yeah, they pay.
Like contract rate or
I think it's
something.
$40 an hour is what we charge them.
And the cleaning of the uniform. Just kidding.
What's that?
And the cleaning of the uniform?
They want to have a uniformed officer, right? Not just.
Well, if it's mud wrestling, yeah, that's part of it. Okay? So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted. Received, well, that would be under correspondence. I had made you guys aware, and I'll just put this out there, that we had received confirmation from County Executive Mark Molinaro that we have been approved for $49,000 for our community block grant we had applied for. We had submitted this grant application last fall, and due to the sequestration, the funds were in question because it's HUD funding. But the county did receive the money from HUD, and we have been notified that we did get the $49,000. So the application for $49,000 was to install 2 more handicap accessible crosswalks. One will be located on Route 9 Mill Street by M&T Bank, and the other one on West Market Street by Garden Street. So hopefully we'll get going on that in September. You know what I forgot to bring up?
The bidding of the South Parsonage Road?
Yeah, I got to go downstairs for a minute. I'll be right back.
Because someone doesn't like
That's
the
the
author.
application, that's the preliminary application right there.
Because the 3 of us don't like the author.
Okay.
I mean,
South Parsonage Street paving project. We had received 4 bids. We did open the bids yesterday. The 4 contractors were in attendance. We had received one from Stat Construction, one from Callanan Industries, and from Avello Brothers and Colarusso and Sons. And Colarusso and Sons were the low bidder. Do you want to know how much they all were? You want me to read that, all of them, or
No.
you want me
Not
to just make
personally,
the
but-
recommendation?
Yeah.
All right, Colarusso and Sons were the low bidder significantly. Their bid for Phase 1 and Phase 2, which is the entire length of South Parsonage Street, came to $97,700. To the specifications that the engineer had specified. The high bid was around 180. So there was quite a range in there. I think the second highest bid was around 145,000. So it was significantly lower. So in consultation with Tom Mannix, he recommends that we award this bid to Colarusso and Sons, so I am going to make a motion to that effect. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
When do they expect them to start?
Tom, in his email to me, recommended starting or awarding this to them tonight and then contacting them and trying to set up a meeting as soon as possible so they can get started as soon as possible. And at least make Phase 1 completed before school opens. Hopefully Phase 2 can be too. I mean, this is a big operation, so I don't see why they can't get in there and get it done.
Right, okay.
Okay? Any other discussion?
Did Tom call them and make sure that they went over, make sure, because the pricing is so different, he made sure that they followed the specs?
Yep, and I spoke to him
All right.
too. Yep. Yep. And, you know, all the specifications are in here. They actually detailed it and named all of the DOT specs and all of that in it, so that's how he had put it out there. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted. Give me a hand here, Howard. Hold that envelope.
Making me earn my money here, Jim.
That's why you make the big bucks, pal.
Yeah.
You're gonna help Pat stuff envelopes tomorrow.
What time?
Okay. That's all I have for other business. Anybody else have anything?
I have something small here.
Promise?
Tom, what's that?
Do you promise?
Tom Walbank wants to have Justin Drapnik get out-of-title pay. Tom is on vacation starting tomorrow. He's going to be back next Tuesday, so that's 4 days.
Did we approve that last time?
No, that was for last week.
This is again?
That's again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I want to make a motion to approve out-of-title pay for Justin Drapnik for the time between July 31st and August 5th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted.
That's for you.
Anything else on?
That's it. I'd like to go to executive session if nobody else.
Anybody else have any other business?
No.
Oh, wait, we have a...
Mike?
I was here on May 14th regarding 47 West Market Street, along with 14 other neighbors and concerned citizens regarding that structure and its change of use. You wrote a nice letter as a board through the CEO to the landlord on May 16th, posing 9 questions. As we approach the 1st of August, we have not had all of them answered, and I just want to publicly say that there are a lot of very concerned people in this town who want a public hearing regarding that site, regarding what's in there, so that they can have these questions answered. Because by my calculation, I believe there's been 5 different deadlines, and we'll meet, and this person and that person, will answer the questions. And as of this date, we're still waiting for, these to be answered, because it is a change of use. I spoke to Leo Stronger, who was the county doctor who ran the facility, and when it was a county facility, he transferred to Occupations, Inc. when it was turned over to them. And what he has told me is significantly different than what both these 3 organizations and what our county executive has conveyed to the mayor. So I just kind of want to put that out there publicly and hope that you will continue to work on this situation, because it's gotten better. But we do have laws in this village, and the village residents would like to see them adhered to. So that's all I'll say for now, unless anybody has a question of me.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Any other business? Okay, we need to go to executive session for water department issues. No, the issue that we had talked about earlier. Is that an appointment? Yeah, it's an employment issue.
That's under the billing system, yeah, that would be under employment.
Okay. So executive session, we need a motion?
Motion.
I'll make a motion to go to executive session.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted.
Seconded.
Ally. Okay, I need a motion to return to regular session, please.
I make a motion, we move to regular session.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted. Anybody have any other business?
No, not me.
Motion to adjourn, please.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted. Thank you. Thanks, Pat.